also happens, and the good news is that this will be recorded. So, but in an effort to make this as useful as we can, please try to remain as present as you can so that we can discuss any relevant questions that come up for you. How about I introduce myself, because not everyone knows who I am here. My name is Carla Ortega-Santori. I am the Strategic Initiatives Manager at the Doerr Institute. Welcome today to this webinar on pilot tendencies. What can we learn from them? And we'll delve deeper into those in a minute. So my role at the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University is to essentially manage this classification. So about 90%, 80% of my job is this classification and everything that it entails. The other portion of my time is spent working on evidence-based strategies to develop our students as leaders. So I help with research on that. My background is in IO psychology, so I really enjoy whenever I can put knowledge to use. So that is my background. I am currently living in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I'm from. So if you hear birds, they're probably outside my window. So I hope it's not too distracting. But yes, I am here. I'm very excited to talk more about this with all of you. So if you hear that or a baby crying, it's my baby. He's downstairs, but he's being taken care of, so it's all good. I'll turn it over to Donette to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donette Noble. I'm at Fort Hays State University, which is in kind of Northwest Kansas. It's very rural out here, so we have a large service region. I have a split appointment at the university. I am faculty in the Leadership Studies Department, and then I am also the Director of Civic Learning and Engagement for the university. And I wear a lot of hats under my administrative role. I co-chair chair some committees, university-wide committees, and I also co-chair Goal 5 of our university's strategic plan, which is all about community engaged teaching, research, and service. And I am just really happy to be a part of this webinar with Carla today. I first had the pleasure of meeting her and working with her in January 2020, when a consortium of people came together to start talking about what would this classification even look like. And so it is just thrilling to be at this point now where it's like a thing. And hopefully a lot of you, if you're on the fence, you haven't made a decision about whether your institution will be pursuing this, hopefully you'll walk away today with a lot more information and understanding and be really excited to jump on board and explore this journey with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Donette. Yes, back when we met in 2020, COVID wasn't a thing yet. But we did get to talk about this classification, and we did it over mariachi music at Rice University with one of our student bands was there, and it was great. So let's get into it. Some technical things to discuss. This webinar will be recorded. It will be made available on our website and on Higher Led. You can send your questions using the chat function. We'll have a section dedicated to questions at the very end. But if you think of something and you don't want to lose that thought, you can just type it in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we end the content of the presentation. I think everyone has muted their audio, but please mute your audio during the first part of the webinar. Once we get into questions, feel free to unmute to ask your question. We'd love to hear from you. All right, some background. So the Universal Classifications were first published by the Carnegie Foundation in the 1970s, and they've been the nation's leading framework for describing U.S. higher education institutions. The elective classifications were actually created to serve another purpose. So they are voluntary self-studies designed to measure or gauge an institution's commitment to a particular area of focus. Earlier this year, the foundation partnered with ACE, which is the American Council on Education, to give both types of classifications one organizational home at ACE. So the strategic vision, general direction of elective classifications is handled by the folks at ACE. And at the Doerr Institute, we are the stewards of the leadership elective classification. So we manage all the administrative duties, such as organizing and facilitating these types of events, webinars, managing the review process, collaborating with the National Advisory Committee, and so on. But we are in constant communication with ACE and the foundation to make sure we follow their standards and meet the foundation's expectations. Some important dates to have in mind. If you are interested in submitting an application, you must purchase it by July 2023. So you don't need to finish it. You don't need to submit it by then, but you must purchase it by then to be able to submit it at the end of December. So applications will be due by December 2023. So if you start today, you will have over a year to complete the process. Isn't that exciting? And a year goes by really fast. So it's a great time to start this effort. So let's delve into this idea of leadership for public purpose a little bit. And it's important to discuss this because we will come back to it when we discuss the tendencies. When we set out to create this framework, like Donette said back in 2020, and to create this classification, we knew it had to examine leader development and leadership education. But how could we make sure to capture the diversity of activities related to leadership in that very broad sense that it takes place in colleges and universities? So we, like Donette said, we worked with leadership scholars, we worked with practitioners, we worked with the foundation to come up with this concept of leadership for public purpose. And you may hear me say just leadership throughout the presentation because leadership for public purpose can be a tongue twister for me sometimes. So I'll take leadership sometimes. So we received feedback, we edited that definition, and what we have today is this definition that states that leadership must transcend narrow personal gains or organizational gains, and instead focus on this pursuit of public goods like justice, equity, diversity, liberty. One important thing to note is that leadership for public purpose can be manifest in all realms of social life. So private business, public and nonprofit institutions, neighborhood and community life, professional associations, civil and government institutions, religious institutions, etc. So it's good to have that in mind because many institutions, and one of the most frequently asked questions I've had is, well, we can't really apply to this. We can't go through this classification because we don't have a school of public policy or we don't have a school of public administration. But that is not the case. So that last part of the classification's name is less of an inconvenience that you might think. It's in the very first section of the application, you will be asked to examine how your university's approach to leadership education contributes to that idea, to that pursuit of these public goods. So it is much more applicable, and you can find it in a lot more ways. And it is happening on your campus probably, and you just haven't noted it or given it that name. So keep that in mind as we continue the conversation today. So operationally, what does a campus that is committed to leadership for public purpose look like? Well, throughout the application, there is a focus to collect data that provides or proves what you see on this screen. So things that evidence that there is creation of knowledge via research or activities. So that knowledge is also shared within and beyond the institution. Evidence that students are being prepared to lead and pursue these public goods that I just spoke of, and that there is an intentional planning and monitoring of how all stakeholders are exposed to leader development. So by stakeholders, we mean staff, faculty, and students. So how are all those people being developed as leaders or being taught about leadership in the campus? So before we decided to launch the classification, we knew that a pilot process had to be done. So in November of 2020, we initiated this pilot application process where institutions were invited to go through the self-study. So they went through essentially what an application process would be during this first cycle. And it was very important for us to gather a group of institutions that was diverse in size, geographical location, and institution type, because we wanted to make sure that people or that we could get all these different viewpoints to look at the classification, go through the process, and give us feedback. So we ended up with 9 institutions, and the pilot process spanned over 7 months. They created their campus teams, they kicked off, collected data, and completed the application. Once they submitted their application, a core team of reviewers evaluated the applications and offered feedback to the pilot cohort. And this process revealed some opportunities for us to improve the process and some common tendencies among applications, because everyone thinks their institution is wildly different from all others, but there's so many similarities in some respects. And it was very interesting to see, I think, during that review process. So what we'll do today is you have the benefits of hearing for the first time some of these results that we found, what the reviewers' recommendations were to move forward, and you'll also hear from Donette's perspective at Fort Hays. So let's delve in a little deeper into what it is reviewers were looking at. So the application covers a wide variety of data. So everything from a detailed description of the campus to a list of leadership-related research that faculty has conducted. So because the application is so comprehensive, the reviewers evaluated applications holistically, but they paid special attention to the 5 topics you have on your screen. And we're going to zoom in on 3 of these areas that were top of mind for most institutions in the pilot. So we'll start off with the definition. First, I think reviewers recognize that this idea of leadership for public purpose was a newly established definition. And we've talked about what that looks like operationally and in the application. We also asked each institution to look at the foundations definition that you saw on your screen and to provide a version of each campus's conceptual framework that delineates really what, how, and when leadership for public purpose happens. And the definition is really the foundation of everything. So having a precise and rigorous definition that is kind of repeated throughout the university will eventually help to align strategy, track, and evaluate and assess what leadership for public purpose is. So we found, or the reviewers found, that many institutions framed this conceptual approach within the university's mission, which was great to see. They used different types of models like competency models, experiential learning models. So that was very interesting to see how different universities approach this. Another thing that we saw was a more of an implicit and contextual approach to leadership. So less operational and more vague in their definition of what leadership for public purpose is or how they approach it on their campus. So the reviewers' recommendations were pretty simple but complex when you go to execute. Essentially to settle on a precise or a definition that is institution-wide and that is rigorous and precise. So parsing out when it's leadership and when it's something like service learning or experiential learning is really helpful. Looking at how leader development or leadership education is reiterated at the university or college level. So is it in the mission statement? Is it in the strategic plan? Is it in the university-wide comms? Institutions that were really successful in this section focused on how their approach to leadership education and development relates to leadership for public purpose. And some used, like I said, a competency model to explain. Others related their institutional values to leadership. They, one college focused on how their experiential learning model focuses on leadership and the pursuit of public goods. And institutions that were less successful, like I said, were more implicit in saying everything we do is leadership or leadership is everywhere. And that is really not helpful for when you're trying to track it or monitor it later on. So that is what the reviewers found, but I'd love for you all to hear from Donette's experience and how she's tackling this in this cycle.
Thank you, Carla. Just to give everybody a little bit of background, I assume that there are plenty of people here today who are unfamiliar with Fort Hays State University, but we are a state comprehensive university. And as such, we really have three kind of broad areas that we focus on as a comprehensive university. I mean, the first one is providing an affordable quality education. And we do have 200 plus minors, majors, certificates, undergrad, graduate degrees, et cetera. So we've got a lot going on in that regard. The other thing as a state comprehensive university is that we are really focused on bolstering the economic prosperity in our service region. And the third thing is working to strengthen the civic and social health in the communities that we serve. And geographically, here in Kansas, we have a large service region because we are in the western portion of the state, so we have a big geographic area, but a lot of small towns and some really unique needs because we are in a rural space. But anyway, I wanted to share that. We also have, in terms of our delivery, we have roughly maybe about 4,500 students on campus in Hays. And then we also deliver education online. And then we have international partnerships. So we have a physical presence overseas, primarily in China. We've had some really rigorous, robust programs there. But anyway, so we have a lot going on for a small institution. We also have 5 academies or institutes, and we have the contract for the Small Business Development Center throughout Kansas with 12 different locations. And we're a national security agency, center of excellence in terms of cybersecurity, and we're a regional, through our criminal justice program, a regional de-escalation training center. That was a lot of money. There were a lot of grants involved in the launch of that. But anyway, so we're kind of small, but we're doing kind of big things in really interesting and creative ways. And because of our status as a state comprehensive university, we were all in on this notion. Of course, we're serving the public purpose and the public good with our programming and our different initiatives. But as we started to tackle the pilot application, I think the best way I can describe some of our aha moments, it was kind of like if you've ever seen the Hint water commercial with the lemurs when they're like, whoa, whoa, you're freaking me out here. That was kind of what happened to us along the way. We even have a mention of leaders in our mission statement at Fort Hays. Specifically, we are committed to developing engaged global citizen leaders. And one of the first things was, oh my gosh, what is that? What does that even look like? Do we have a definition of that? And if so, which we didn't, we discovered have a really specific definition. But how would we measure that? And I mean, it's pretty broad, this mission, but anyway, so it was fascinating. And that has, I mean, one of the beautiful things about this process is it's been so illuminating and developmental for us along the way, because immediately when we realized we've not done anything to measure whether or not we're actually delivering on that mission statement, then that was the catalyst for a research project, where we're really getting into the nuts and bolts of defining what is an engaged global citizen leader and what does that framework look like and how will we assess that. So it's been really exciting to be a part of this. But in terms of the recommendations that Carla just mentioned about a rigorous and precise definition of leadership for public purpose, we do have leadership development occurring in multiple spaces across our university, both in curricular and co-curricular spaces. And we have an entire leadership studies department that is, responsible for a lot of programming on our campus. But there are so many different spaces where this is occurring, and it looks very different in terms of who is delivering that leadership development experience, whether it's through student engagement, which is under that student affairs portion of the university, or whether it's a curricular program. And even the different colleges have space in their programs, in their departments, where leadership is a part of that. But we have not had common language around what this is, nor have we necessarily had common outcomes and objectives for our leadership development. So we are really excited at this point in terms of definition to be really intentionally bringing people together across campus to define what are these definitions and what are the outcomes and what are the objectives. And, we need to do this in a really interesting way that, we do have this common understanding, but that we also leave space so that there's flexibility depending on the specific needs of an academic program or a co-curricular space.
Donette, that is so helpful. I love how you illustrate the process, and like Donette said, it's happening in so many places that you don't know of. And sometimes it takes a process like this to get all these different stakeholders together and come to an agreement on what leadership is and what it isn't on campus. Let's look at one of the other areas that was fairly common. So infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, we mean the different centers, roles, or mechanisms that oversee leadership on campus. And what we found was that there's a lack of a centralized structure or position that oversees leadership for public purpose. And that's fairly common. I mean, that was what most institutions found. This usually leads to maybe a lack of coordination, siloed efforts, and just a general lack of oversight. And we recognize that the field is slowly evolving to consider this and change it. That's what we saw within the applications. There was careful consideration behind that. And some institutions even had plans to set up a central office, or to coordinate amongst centers or departments. What the reviewers recommended mostly centered around really, if there are various centers and departments, which that could be the case and that can be the case, if that is the scenario at your campus, then focus on how those centers or offices coordinate and communicate. Provide a clear understanding of the responsibilities and roles for each office or each unit. If you have concrete plans to centralize efforts, detail those. That is also helpful for reviewers to know. And looking to the future, continue to develop this idea of a centralized structure or role that supports leadership for public purpose on campus. So developing that idea, institutionalizing it so that others are aware of the benefits of having a centralized structure or role. But also, a lot of institutions showed a lot of coordination amongst offices and departments, and that was very helpful for reviewers to know and to kind of follow that thread and know who is monitoring what, who is delivering these programs, and who is tracking this campus-wide. What was the case at Fort Hays, Donette? Or how are you handling this going into the first cycle?
This has been really fascinating because we've already started to make some significant changes, and we have been, as an institution, going through some restructuring over the course of the last couple of years, and we're not quite done with that. But we've made some significant changes in how we're approaching things, and to create the scaffolding necessary to get some consistency behind these efforts is very necessary, and we're excited about that. But we started, for example, with these coordinated efforts, we realized that, we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things on our campus, and they're not necessarily communicating about what they're doing. And so we've already started to shift some of our endeavors to different areas. For example, I used to have some student-led projects and programs, some of which were focusing on leadership development, that I was responsible for. And as we gave this more thought, we realized that really those needed to move to student engagement and to let them have a more complete array of programs that they could deliver, since they are very student focused. And so where I am focused now with my efforts are with community partnerships and with, helping faculty and staff fine-tune their programs, and then also working to coordinate some of these efforts, because I'm talking to a lot of different people on campus about their programs and who the stakeholders are for their programs, who they're developing and designing these for. And then I am trying to find things that make sense for people to be working together on, because we really were falling into this trap of those siloed efforts and not communicating effectively with one another across campus about what we're all doing. And in a conversation it's been within the last couple of months with some leadership educators about this very issue, one of our leadership colleagues from CU Boulder was talking about cylinders of excellence. And I loved that term. I just thought it was so wonderful, and so we have at Fort Hays a lot of cylinders of excellence, but it could be so much better if we have these coordinated efforts and we have a centralized structure for how we're going to focus on our leadership for public purpose, and what will the programs, the programs need to continue existing, these efforts in various efforts across campus, but we need to strengthen them by, coordinated efforts and working from that space of common language and common understanding. And so I think we're already starting to address these challenges and making some really exciting changes. And I think as this happens, we will have more people that are excited about what we're trying to accomplish with this and become involved in this effort. So, but it is interesting to just recognize, and this opportunity created the space for us to be able to do that, oh my gosh, it's really scattered at times and very siloed. And so specifically as Director of Civic Learning and Engagement, that is the office that is going to be that centralized space. So if people want information about this, they can come to me, they can come to our chair. We have an advisory board now focused on civic learning and engagement, and that is comprised of 40% campus members and 60% community members. And it's tipped in favor of community members very intentionally, because we really need their input and feedback as we're developing these frameworks and creating the scaffolding for this. But ultimately, our goal is to have a specific web presence for civic learning and engagement, which is where the Leadership for Public Purpose efforts will reside. And whether it's a community member or a student or a faculty or staff member, anybody can go to that web space, and we will have a plethora of resources available. If they have projects or activities that they're working on and they want partners, you know, we can connect people who would be the best entities or people to be working on specific projects to accomplish our work in terms of, you know, serving this public purpose and, you know, creating that programming very intentionally around the leadership development for that specific reason. So I hope that was clear. That was a lot to take in, but it's already, you know, we're seeing some positive results from the restructuring we've already done. And there's a lot more to do. So we're going to be, I think the other thing that is really interesting about going through the application process is that it is, you know, we're writing the application, but it's developmental, and we're actually implementing and doing things while we're writing the application. You know, so by the time we get to December 2023, the things that were just, you know, just nuggets of thoughts in this moment will actually be operationalized by then. So that's pretty exciting.
That is exciting, and I can't wait to see how that application turns out. But like Donette said, it's a chance to also just zoom out and see how everything is working together and how those cylinders of excellence are interacting. Let's take a look at one other area that is highly asked about and talked about. So assessment is really key in the classification process, mainly because these mechanisms provide all the information to know if a program is successful or if an initiative is really aligned to the university's overall mission. So, and ultimately, all change should be driven by this data. Most institutions in the pilot, really all institutions, recognize the importance of assessments, and they have plans in place to develop some robust mechanisms. There was mostly a wide variety of assessments that were being used throughout schools and programs, and less evidence of campus-wide assessments, which is what we were kind of expecting, because this is newly established. It's a new concept that we're launching out, and like Donette said, there's a lot of different people doing a lot of leadership work. So they have their own ways of measuring and tracking and monitoring. Another interesting result of this process was that institutions were really able to go out and see everything that was happening around campus with this data. And it was the first time ever aggregating all of this data, which was really interesting to see. The recommendations that the reviewers came up with were really to select or develop assessments that align to your conceptual framework in order to evaluate the appropriate outcomes, to build mechanisms of assessment that are systematic, they're campus-wide, and that they evaluate a variety of aspects of leadership across the institution, because you will be looking at a variety of things during the application process. And using existing assessments that have national comparisons, like the multi-institutional study of leadership, the National Survey of Student Engagement. All of these things were really helpful for some folks through the process. And in many cases, they didn't even realize that there were campus-wide assessments going on, or things that would apply to leadership that were already being monitored or tracked. And also aligning or syncing with accreditation processes was really helpful to see data that had already been gathered or assessments that were already administered. So campus-wide, systematic, and evaluating a wide variety of things, and honing in on whatever your conceptual framework is at your campus was really important. How did assessments look like at Fort Hays, or what are you thinking about for this application cycle, Donette?
I mean, like all institutions, I mean, there are assessments just ongoing, and there are so many, and we do subscribe to some of those national, like NESE, we do that. So we have some institutional-wide assessments that we're doing currently, but again, it's like all programs have some sort of assessment attached to them, in academic units, and we're trying to get a better handle on some of the non-academic units and what some of the assessments are that they are currently using. And, we are not at a point of being able to recommend what assessment, how we're going to accomplish this as it relates to leadership for public purpose, because we're still like in that exploratory stage of, figuring out how many assessments could possibly relate to this that we're already engaged with on campus. And of those, is there one in particular that would make the most sense based on the framework that we're developing for this? So I don't know where ultimately we will land with this, but we know that this is absolutely critical to this process. And as I mentioned with that first slide, when we started talking about the tendencies with the pilot institutions, in terms of definition, it was really that acknowledgement that we didn't have consistent language or clear definitions for even our mission and some of our endeavors, that once we finalize that, then it will make this process of assessment a little bit easier. And we do have great information. We have our Office of Institutional Assessment, and we've had some changes there too. But this is an opportunity as part of this process to work very intentionally with that department in terms of guidance and direction, in terms of how we might want to frame this and who should be a part of those conversations. And, whether ultimately we will develop a new, in-house assessment for some of this, or whether we will find that existing assessment, I don't know. That's yet to be seen, but it is exciting to think about, and it's good to be in this process currently. I mean, we've gone through the pilot application, and now we're going to be working in the inaugural application cycle on this, and what we're learning based on the assessments that we're already doing in different areas of the campus has been really informative, and will help us with this application process and ultimately make that determination about where we want to go. But that's like huge. That's just like a gigantic effort, so it's nice to have, many months ahead of us, to be thinking about that and focused on that.
It is a big process, or a big task to have ahead. And I like that you mentioned, Donette, the ability to either develop them in-house or seek out these assessments that already exist. So one way that we measure at Rice is that we built in this scale of emergent leadership within the end of year survey. So that's one way that we measure leadership abilities in students. We had other institutions in the pilot, like I said, mentioned the use of the multi-institutional leadership study multi-institutional study of leadership, sorry. The National Survey of Student Engagement. Others used, since they had a competency model, they tracked how students progressed within those competencies throughout their 4 years, and so on. There's a lot of different ways to assess learning objectives or learning outcomes, as well as other things that are included in the application. Thank you, Donette. Let's look at kind of other tendencies, and these were just overall tendencies that I observed and others observed during the process. One thing that we saw, I think, across all pilot institutions was just an overwhelming support from administrators. So chancellors, presidents were on board. I had a president join in on one of our debrief sessions. So there's just a lot of enthusiasm for this and a lot of support. And I think that brings a lot of visibility to leadership education and leader development on campus, which was great. Another thing that we saw that was really helpful in the process was viewing the classification as an improvement process. And I think Donna has mentioned this quite a couple of times. And it's viewing this process as something that is in the works, and things that you type out in these answers right now might change by December 2023, and they might become plans that were in progress and they suddenly are happening, they're live. So looking at this as an improvement process is really helpful. And I think also having a really clear idea of why you're in this process and why you're doing this application is very helpful for folks. And it was helpful, I think, for the pilot institutions. One thing that I'll do now is, now that we've discussed kind of the overarching tendencies, the biggest things that we observed during the pilot, let's talk about the way that you tackle all those things that we just discussed in your application. Will be really instrumental for you in this process, and even how you answer different things during the application is very helpful to note. No single question is really a litmus test to receive the classification or not, because each school is so unique. I mean, Donette gave a great overview at Fort Hays State. We also had really small liberal arts colleges on our pilot. We had big research institutions. So there was such a diversity of applications and contexts. So reviewers really have to look at the whole application and not use a single question as a litmus test. So we discussed the definition, infrastructure, and assessment. Well, if the questions under assessment or one question under assessment isn't really as strong as you'd hoped, don't freak out, because there is different ways to answer it, and there's no one question that would eliminate you from getting the classification. When you're answering questions, consider these different answer levels that reviewers may be looking out for. So the strongest, I think, type of answer is writing out whatever your implemented plan is, right? We have implemented this and we observed this as a result. The answer level right below that is having a plan in development. So we actually plan to implement these changes by X dates or by spring 2024. Having that level of detail is also helpful for reviewers to understand where your head is at where the institution is at really. A plan proposal is what's right below that. And that's to say, we've formed a committee to address this. We've started designing a solution. We've started to talk about this with administrators, which is great. You're taking action, but having a more level of detail in that would be most helpful. And then really the lowest level of an answer that you can give, which is still even better than a blank answer, is having insight but no real plan. So yes, we recognize this is an opportunity to improve on assessment. And then that's where the answer ends. So recognizing it and also saying, but we plan to select or develop our assessment that measures this, this, and this is really helpful for reviewers to be able to evaluate. Before we move over to questions, I will share a few of these links to resources that you are able to access. So we have Higher Led, our online community platform. It gives you access to all types of materials from the classification. It will also connect you to other leadership scholars and practitioners that are interested ultimately in improving leadership development in higher education. So we hope to see you there. You also have access to the Doerr Institute website and the classifications website, and I'll put those in the chat in a minute. And what I'll do now really quickly before we go into questions is show you around the online application so that you get a feel for it. And then once I'm done with that, we can move over to questions. And I think I see a few questions in the chat that I will look at as soon as I'm done here. Let me stop sharing. And now I will share my other screen. Are you all able to see the GivePulse site on your screen? Great. Okay, so let me just copy paste all these links for you. Right. So on that very last link, you will be directed to this site on GivePulse. And GivePulse is the platform that hosts our application and the community engagement classification. So you would be directed right here. You would have to click right here where it says Carnegie Leadership Classification, a ticketed event, but it's really a survey. After you click on that, it'll prompt you to purchase the application. And once you click on this purchase button, you would select one application. No need to purchase more than one. And then you would enter your iPad's number here. So doing a quick search for your institution's iPad's number will turn up a number. You will input it here, apply it, and then hit continue, and it'll prompt you to the rest of the purchasing process. Once you're done with that, this is what you'll see. Okay, this is the application. It has some handy buttons over here at the top to have these different sections fixed. You can click through those and see the different sections and questions. Your answers are saved, so you can keep working on it. But I would suggest that you finish your application on a separate document and just copy paste here so that you don't lose anything. Because one thing that our friend Jennifer Moss-Breen told us is that she didn't really realize that because these text boxes have a 500 word limit, if you type more than 500 words, it'll start erasing what was at the top. So please do that on your Word documents or Google Drive separately, and then copy paste here. So answers are saved, which is great. There is a 500 word limit. So focus on the data that is very important or most relevant for what you're trying to provide evidence for. And there is an option for you to add collaborators. So if you click on this button that says collaborators, you can click on here. It says add collaborator. And you'll be able to send an invite to anyone else on your team that needs access to the application. Great. So I'll stop sharing and I'll open the floor to questions. I'm going to take a look at what was in the chat first. And if you have a question pop up, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself if no one else is asking anything. Let's see.
Yeah, Carla, while you're looking at those questions, I just wanted to share with everyone that having gone through this process, the pilot application once, I have a couple of thoughts that may make this process more comfortable for some of you. One is that in terms of collaborators, my experience, our experience at Fort Hays has led us to believe that fewer is better on that actual application space so that you have less chance of information getting, in the wrong sections or deleted inadvertently. But you will need a lot of people to be a part of this application process. And one of the things we are working on now as a result of our pilot experience, one of my leadership studies faculty and I are developing our plan for working our way through the application. And so we are developing our timeline, and we've gone through the framework, which is basically the application. It's available online without purchasing it. So you can look at what the application entails. And we are making a determination in terms of each section who we need to invite into this process with us. And, we're identifying key leads for each of these different sections, but then he and I will be managing this entire process. But designating a lead for specific sections and people to work on those sections will be really helpful moving forward based on our pilot experience.
I mean, it's a huge project management task when you come to think of it. So it really does take a lot of that planning and managing. So Judith Ann asked, have any of the 9 pilot institutions been awarded the classification? Well, no, they have not, because we could not award that classification or designation in the pilot. They are actually applying now in this first cycle, along with all of you that will be applying. So they will find out in 2024. Maren, I think you asked for the multi-institutional study of leadership, and Mike was kind enough to mention it. Ryan was even kinder to link to it. So thank you both. And Judith Ann, could you please share your end of year survey? Yes, please send me an email to CO29. I'm just going to write it here in case, and remind me, please, so that we can take a look at that together. And yes, you can see the application on the website before purchasing it. If you're not able to do that, you can also go to the Doerr Institute website, and under resources, you will find the PDF version of the application so that you can take a look at those questions. Deirdre, I do not have I don't have the slides up yet, but I will. I just made a note of that because the recording will be available, but I will also make sure to share the slides.
Thank you.
Of course. And Mike also shared the application. Thank you. Rami or Romy, how do you prefer for me to?
It's Romy.
Romy. Okay, yeah. Good. Romy, how often will you run the classification application process? It will be parallel to the CE classification. So we will have the cycle in 2024 and the next cycle will be in 2026. So every 2 years essentially. And institutions will hold their designations for, I believe it's 6 years, if that has not changed. Andrew, at this point, no one has the certification yet. So you could be part of the first to receive it. Any other questions? You can unmute yourselves if you have anything come up, because we're done with the ones in the chat. I'll give you a minute. One thing that we were asked, I think, in the last webinar was how to get started with this. And I think one of the ways that folks can get started is first downloading that PDF version of the application so that you can take a look at what are the questions that are being asked. And then I think another big key is getting your team together. Like Donette said, having a diverse team on campus is really important. If you're able to gather people from all over campus that are in any way, supporting leadership development or leadership education, that is helpful because they will have different perspectives and different purviews of what is going on that you may or may not be able to see or access. The Office of Institutional Research was really helpful in a lot of places. Having the communications team on board was also helpful. I heard from folks that were giving like regular updates for the whole university on how the classification application was going. The Office of the President is also helpful to get support. But yeah, really take a look at who is doing leadership education on campus, who is doing leader development, and also think of who might be a challenge in this process, right? Who might, I don't want to say obstacle, but who might not be a supporter of this, and get ahead of that, because there's really no downside to doing it except, I mean, it is a lot of effort that you put into it, but once you apply, once you go through the application publicly, no one will know that you applied and did not get it. So only the people that apply and get it are made public. So that is also an upside. Although there's a lot of people that are very vocal about when they haven't gotten it. But that is also something to keep in mind.
Something else that has been really helpful for us at Fort Hays as we've started to pursue this is, I mean, we do have that administrative support. Our president and our provost are really excited about this, and so we have a lot of backing and support with them. But we also, there have been opportunities to share this information with the president's executive and senior leadership team. And that was really important as well, right off the bat, so that they would understand what we're trying to accomplish. And then they can share this information with the people who report to them so that they will be prepared at such time that we're reaching out to, different units and different departments and saying, hey, we need your input on this, or we need this information from you, or will you share this data set, whatever it is. And so we've had a lot of support in terms of you know, people in the upper echelons of our institution, making others aware that, yes, we want you to fully participate and embrace this process. So that's really helpful too.
Indeed. It really is helpful to have a champion too on campus that helps you push this forward. Well, we're coming up to an hour and 2 minutes, so I don't want to take up any more of your time. While I wait for anyone else to hang on if they have a question or ask it in the chat, I'd like to ask again, how, on a scale of 1 to 5, how ready are you now for the fall semester? You can put it in the chat. 1 being, oh God, I hope the students don't arrive. Or 5 being, let's do this, I'm ready. 5, ready, set, go. I mean, it's now or never, right? We're kind of already here. 3, that's a very humble and honest answer, Celeste. 6, Mariana, you have to share your secret. How is it a 6?
A 6 with smiley faces. So that's
I
like
know.
really awesome.
I know. I mean, that would be me after maybe my 3rd cup of coffee. I would be like, yes. Move-in day today. Mike, if you need help getting buy-in, just give us a call and we'll make an appearance. Okay. A lot of high numbers. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited for the fall semester. A lot of great things will happen. We will have more webinars and in-depth workshops. We will be making the rounds in a few conferences, so I hope to see you there in person or virtual. It's been great having you here. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I put it in the chat, or hang around and I'll make sure to answer anything that comes up for you.